All right, we have more changes unfolding over at the U.S. Supreme Court, changes that just saw a landmark rule forcing a major policy reversal, a reversal of a policy. It's been set in stone for years. This one policy has given these left-wing governments, politicians, the leeway that they needed to turn our cities upside down, to allow homelessness, for example, to soar. And most interesting of all, the one state above the rest that's been forced into a corner by his decision, California, and the governor himself, Gavin Newsom. Gavin, you have some decisions to make. Finally, accountability may be coming to California. But before we get started, thank you for liking and sharing these videos. It really helps out the channel, and consider subscribing so you don't miss these regular updates. So for the last decade or so, homelessness and crime have been rising around the country. West Coast cities in particular, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, San Jose even, just to name a few, have been overrun. San Francisco, once one of the most beautiful cities in the country, maybe even the world, a true gem of a city. Ask anyone who's grown up there what it was like 15 years ago compared to today. You walk through some of these neighborhoods now and they're virtually unrecognizable, filled with homeless encampments. Once nice neighborhoods today look like you're walking through the ghettos of Afghanistan or through the filth of Mumbai, India. It's hard to imagine you can wreck a city as beautiful as San Francisco, but they have. In fact, it's gotten that bad. San Fran's been nicknamed Tent City, just like Seattle was a few years before. Now, most people who hear about this problem, they wonder why. Like, how did this happen? It's a question that needs to be answered. What changed? What's different out west? Why are these West Coast cities having such an issue, so much of a problem? Why don't I see this, for example, in my local city, right? Well, the homelessness aspect specifically can be traced back to one decision made in 2018 by the judges of the uber-liberal Ninth Circuit Court, who okayed the idea of pitching a tent anywhere you want on a sidewalk, a public park, in front of an elementary school. Now, let me just say, in principle, I agree with this sort of idea. The last thing I want is the government telling me what I can or can't do, where I can do what I want or can't do what I want. For example, I have traveled in the Pacific Northwest. One of the great things about it is after driving all day, you could just pull over on a local forest road. You can camp and nobody bothers you. It gives you a sense of freedom, like real freedom. You can pitch your tent, build a campfire, make a cup of coffee. No plan really on exactly where you're headed. Now, to some people that probably sounds awful, but if that doesn't sound awful to you, I'd recommend giving it a try. It's actually a really good feeling. Now, obviously, there's assholes out here who take advantage of situations like this, like the left-wing politicians who have used this Ninth Circuit Court decision to argue that their hands are tied, that their agency's hands are tied by this ruling, that it prohibits them from stopping these massive homeless encampments that pop up. And the one politician who's now most in the crosshairs, basically forced into a corner after this, is California Governor Gavin Newsom. This guy has single-handedly used this ruling more than anyone else constantly for the last 6 years. This was his go-to excuse, the reason he gave over and over and over again. Whenever he was asked during an interview or a debate on stage why his state has such a homeless problem. Why does California have this problem, but Florida doesn't? Why does California make up 12% of the U.S. population, but 28% of U.S. homelessness? Why? And he just lets it happen. And he would argue how his hands are tied, again, how the Ninth Circuit ruled homeless encampments are untouchable.
Newsom saying, California has invested billions to address homelessness, but rulings from the bench have tied the hands of state and local governments to address this issue. The Supreme Court can now correct course and end the costly delays from lawsuits that have plagued our efforts to clear encampments and deliver services to those in need.
Well, good news. Major news. In fact, the Supreme Court just took that excuse away, ruling 6-3 on a landmark decision Friday for cities to enforce bans on homeless people sleeping outdoors. This case comes from Grants Pass, Oregon. If you've never been, it's actually a pretty neat little city. It's a small, nice place positioned almost at the base of this bowl, surrounded by mountains. Again, really pretty. And the people of Grants Pass wanted to keep it that way after homeless encampments began popping up in their local city parks and realized that Grants Pass, it's not a big city. A homeless encampment affects everyone there. Well, the city tried to block it from happening, only to be met with the ire of its liberal governor telling Grants Pass the homeless encampment popping up, you can't touch them. You touch them, you break the law. So Grants Pass, they filed a lawsuit that made its way to the highest court in the country. And they ruled Grants Pass and every city in the country has not only the right to remove these homeless encampments, these tent cities, if you will, sweep out these tent cities, but at the Ninth Circuit's ruling, they set in place prohibitions on these homeless encampments, their cruel and unusual punishment ruling that you can crumple it up and throw it away.
A landmark decision from the U.S. Supreme Court on the issue of homelessness. In a 6-3 vote, the High Court cleared the way for cities to enforce bans on homeless people sleeping outdoors when there's no shelter space. The case centered around Grants Pass. The Southern Oregon city tried to block people from sleeping and camping in public spaces, including sidewalks, streets, and city parks. On Friday, the High Court found those rules did not violate constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. The decision is likely to alter how cities and states throughout the West handle homelessness.
Now think about this. All those left-wing politicians, the governors of the Northwest states in Washington, Oregon, and California, like Gavin Newsom, no longer have an excuse for why they support these crack dens and homeless encampments, how they let that one Ninth Circuit ruling lead to all this other bureaucratic nonsense, led to all the wasted time and taxpayer money to keep the illusion going that they want to solve the homeless problem, throwing billions of dollars away on ridiculous programs to study homelessness, study the inequity of homelessness. So all a sham, folks, basically. In the interim of that, while they've been lying to us, $20 billion from Gavin Newsom's office spent on this issue studying the inequity of homelessness, $20 billion, actually $24 billion to be exact, that's unaccounted for now, by the way. If you remember last month, the state auditor's office said California can't account for over $24 billion in taxpayer money that Gavin spent on his homeless program. $24 billion just gone. And realize California is facing a $50 billion deficit this year, meaning the state brings in less than it makes. They're $50 billion short. It can't pay the bills this year, can't keep the lights on without raising their taxes this year even more, borrowing even more. And this is what he wants to bring, by the way, to a national level. He's been groomed for the White House, folks. He's on their short list, even after all the screw-ups and failed policies. Now, realize California, highest homeless population in the country at one state, makes up 28% of our nation's homeless population. It's nearly doubled since he's been governor, and he's got the nerve to want to bring this nonsense to the rest of the country. He wants to expand these tent cities on a national level, saying California's homeless policy is a national model for what's to come. You can't make this up.
If there's any good news, and I'll close on this officially, state of California has seen a decline in veterans homelessness. We have a national model. What Proposition 1 did is it reinforced that model, provided more resources to advance that model, and we're very excited to get those dollars to work.
Now, I think Newsom's being considered seriously as Biden's replacement. Help us all if that were to happen. The good news, though, is that polling shows Trump trouncing Newsom if he were to be Biden's replacement. Now, in March, Rasmussen polled 912 swing voters. They found Trump would win in a head-to-head matchup against Newsom by, get this, 17 points. Then in February, Emerson College ran a similar poll with 1,225 registered voters. It showed Trump would win by 10 points. Now, Newsom would be doing better, technically all these politicians would, if they would just tell us what they believe. If he supports homelessness, then say it. Tell California that. Be honest. Defend your policies. It's the same thing with illegal immigration. They pretend they oppose it. Joe Biden says he opposes open borders, yet 10 million illegal immigrants were just allowed to walk right across the southern border in the last 3 years. Americans see right through this crap. It's the reason why the former president is so popular, Donald Trump. He's got his faults, but you know what the guy's thinking. You know what you're getting. He says what he believes, and it's refreshing. But Gavin Newsom, Tina Kotek, Oregon's governor, Jay Inslee, Washington's governor, they tell us one thing, they do something else. Well, now they're about to be called on it. Let's see what they do next.